The cameras were rolling. The audience was laughing. Steve Harvey was mid-joke, that signature grin spreading across his face as he prepared to read the next question on the board. Everything was going exactly as it should on another episode of Family Feud. But then something happened that no one in that studio, not the producers frantically checking their monitors backstage, not the camera operators zooming in for the perfect shot, not even Steve himself could have anticipated. He stopped. Mid-sentence. Mid-gesture. The microphone, which just seconds ago had been capturing his booming voice and infectious laughter, now hung loosely in his hand. His smile faded. His eyes locked onto someone in the red team podium. A woman. A mother. And in that split second, Steve Harvey saw something in her eyes that made him do what he had never done in decades of hosting one of America's most beloved game shows. He stopped the show. The producers backstage went into panic mode. Steve was walking away from his mark. The game board was frozen mid-round. But everyone in that studio, from the audience members gripping their seats to the opposing family watching in stunned silence, knew one thing: this was the right decision. What Steve Harvey saw in that mother's eyes wasn't just sadness. It was a grief so profound, so raw, that it transcended the bright lights and colorful set of a game show. This wasn't about winning money anymore. This wasn't about getting the top answer on the board. This was about something far more important. This was about humanity. And what happened next would become one of the most unforgettable moments in television history. A moment that reminded millions of viewers why Steve Harvey isn't just a host. He's a healer. A father figure. A man who understands that sometimes, the script needs to be thrown away, and all that matters is being present for another human being in pain. Her name was Jennifer. A 42-year-old mother of 3 from Ohio. 6 months before appearing on Family Feud, her husband Michael died suddenly of a heart attack. No warning. No goodbye. The grief was suffocating. Her children convinced her to audition. "Dad would want you to do this," they said. Michael had loved Family Feud. It was their nightly family ritual. So Jennifer said yes for him, for her kids, hoping she could feel something other than crushing sadness. The day arrived. Jennifer stood at the red team podium, hands shaking. Her sister, her 3 children beside her. Steve Harvey bounded onto the stage with infectious energy. The game began normally. Jennifer's family was doing well, getting answers on the board, laughing at Steve's jokes. But Steve noticed something. Between commercial breaks, he watched Jennifer. While her family celebrated, she smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The kind worn by someone trying so hard to be okay that the effort itself is exhausting. The show came back from commercial break. Steve walked back to his mark, picked up his microphone, and prepared to read the next question. But his eyes kept drifting to Jennifer. Something was pulling at him. A instinct. A feeling he couldn't ignore. "All right, folks," Steve said, his voice carrying that familiar warmth that had made him a household name. "We're gonna play the next round. But first..." He paused. The audience waited. The families waited. Even the producers backstage, who were running on a tight schedule, waited. Steve put down his card. He looked directly at Jennifer. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" Jennifer's heart stopped. This wasn't part of the game. This wasn't scripted. Every camera in the studio swung to focus on her face. "Yes?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Are you okay?" 3 words. Simple. Direct. But delivered with such genuine concern that Jennifer felt something inside her crack open. The armor she had been wearing, the brave face she had been maintaining for her children, for the cameras, for herself, suddenly felt too heavy to hold up anymore. Her lips trembled. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Her sister reached for her hand. Her children, standing beside her at the podium, moved closer, forming a protective circle around their mother. Steve Harvey did something then that froze everyone in place. He set down his microphone. Not handed it to a producer. Not placed it carefully on his mark. He just let it drop to his side, the feedback briefly squealing through the speakers before a sound technician muted it. And then he walked toward her. The producers in the control room were frantically trying to figure out what was happening. This wasn't in the rundown. This wasn't planned. But before anyone could make a decision about cutting to commercial or stopping tape, something became very clear. Steve Harvey was no longer hosting a game show. He was doing something far more important. He crossed the space between his podium and the red team's position. The studio, which had been filled with energy and laughter just minutes ago, was now completely silent. You could hear the hum of the stage lights, the quiet shuffle of audience members leaning forward in their seats. Steve stopped directly in front of Jennifer. Up close, he could see what the cameras hadn't fully captured. The exhaustion etched into her face, the trembling in her hands, the desperate way she was trying to hold herself together. "What's your name?" Steve asked softly, even though he already knew from the game card. "Jennifer," she managed to say. "Jennifer, I need you to tell me what's going on. Because I've been doing this a long time, and I can see when someone is carrying something heavy. So heavy that it's taking everything you've got just to stand here." The dam broke. Jennifer's face crumpled. Tears that she had been holding back for months, maybe longer, finally spilled over. Her children wrapped their arms around her, but it was Steve's next move that shocked everyone. He opened his arms. "Come here," he said. And Jennifer, this woman who had been trying so hard to be strong, who had convinced herself that she had to keep it together, who had been drowning in grief while pretending she could swim, collapsed into the embrace of a man she had only known through a television screen. The audience gasped. Some covered their mouths. Others openly wept. The opposing family, who moments ago had been competitors focused on winning the game, stood at their blue podium with tears streaming down their faces, no longer thinking about points or prizes. Steve held Jennifer as she sobbed. One hand on her back, the other cradling her head, he let her cry. He didn't try to stop her. Didn't try to comfort her with empty platitudes. He just held space for her pain. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. After what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, Jennifer's sobs began to quiet. Steve gently pulled back, his hands on her shoulders, looking her directly in the eyes. "Tell me," he said. "Tell everyone here what happened. Because I promise you, you are not alone in whatever you're carrying." And so Jennifer told him. Through tears and shaking breaths, she told the story of Michael. Of the sudden heart attack. Of the morning that started like any other and ended with her world in pieces. Of the months since, where every day felt like walking through fog. Of her children who had convinced her to come here, to try to find joy again, to honor their father's memory by doing something he would have loved. "He watched your show every night," Jennifer said, her voice cracking. "Every single night. It was our family time. And after he died, I couldn't watch it anymore because it hurt too much. But my kids, they said, Mom, Dad would want you to be here. He would want you to laugh again. So I came. I'm trying. I'm trying so hard to be okay for them." Steve Harvey, this man who had built a career on making people laugh, who could command a room with his humor and charisma, stood completely still. His own eyes were wet. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Let me tell you something, Jennifer. And I want everybody in here to hear this." He turned to address not just her, but the entire studio, the cameras, the millions of people who would eventually watch this moment. You don't have to be okay. You don't have to pretend. You don't have to smile if you don't feel like smiling. What you went through, what you're going through, that's real. That pain is real. And anybody who tells you to get over it or move on doesn't understand what love is. He turned back to Jennifer. "You know what I see when I look at you? I see a woman who loved her husband so much that his absence has left a hole in your soul. I see a mother who is still showing up for her children even when she can barely show up for herself. I see strength. Real strength. Not the kind that pretends everything is fine, but the kind that says, I am broken, and I am still here." The audience erupted in applause. But Steve raised his hand, quieting them. He wasn't finished. Michael is watching, Steve said firmly. I don't know your religious beliefs. I don't know what you believe about the afterlife, but I know this. Love doesn't end. It changes form, but it doesn't end. And right now, in this moment, I believe with everything in me that Michael is so proud of you. For getting on this stage. For fighting through the pain. For being here for your kids. Jennifer nodded, unable to speak, tears still flowing freely. Then Steve Harvey did something that would become the most talked about moment of the entire episode. He removed his suit jacket. The beautiful, perfectly tailored navy blue jacket that was part of his signature look. And he draped it over Jennifer's shoulders. This is for you, he said. Not as a prize. Not as some trophy. But as a reminder that you are covered. You are protected. You are not alone in this grief. And whenever it feels like too much, whenever you feel like you can't take another step, I want you to put this jacket on and remember this moment. Remember that you are stronger than you know. The symbolism was not lost on anyone in that studio. Steve Harvey, covering this grieving mother with his own garment, was more than a gesture. It was a covenant. A promise that she was seen, valued, and worthy of comfort. Jennifer clutched the jacket to her chest. Her children were openly crying now, holding on to their mother and each other. Her sister had her hand over her mouth, shoulders shaking with emotion. But here's the moment that no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. The blue team, the opposing family who were supposed to be competing against Jennifer's family, began to move. First one person, then another, then all five of them. They left their podium and walked across the stage. Walked past Steve Harvey. Walked right up to Jennifer and her family. And they embraced them. Complete strangers, brought together by the artificial construct of a game show, competing for a cash prize, set aside every bit of competition and simply became human beings caring for other human beings. The red team and blue team, no longer opponents, stood together in a tangle of arms and tears and shared humanity. Steve Harvey stepped back, watching this unfold. He had started something, but it had taken on a life of its own. The studio audience was on their feet. Many were crying. Some were hugging strangers sitting next to them. The camera operators kept filming, but several of them were wiping their own eyes between shots. One of the producers backstage, the same one who had been panicking when Steve first stopped the show, sat back in his chair. "Don't cut," he said quietly into his headset. "Keep rolling. This is bigger than the show." After several minutes, the families slowly separated. The blue team returned to their podium. Jennifer, still wearing Steve's jacket, wiped her eyes and looked at her children. They nodded at her, that wordless communication that families share. "We're okay, Mom. We're here. We've got you." Steve picked up his microphone. He cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice was different. Softer. More vulnerable than anyone had ever heard from him on this show. "Folks," he said, addressing the audience both in the studio and at home, "we're gonna finish this game. Because that's what we do. We keep going. We keep showing up. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. But this game?" He gestured to the board. "This isn't what matters. What matters is what just happened here. What matters is that we saw each other. Really saw each other." The game continued. Jennifer's family didn't win. But when the episode ended and the cameras stopped rolling, something remarkable happened. The blue team split their prize money with Jennifer's family. Not because they had to. Not because anyone asked them to. But because after what they had experienced together, winning alone felt wrong. Steve Harvey kept in touch with Jennifer. That jacket became more than a piece of clothing. It became a symbol that hung in her closet, a reminder of the day a stranger saw her pain and chose not to look away. Years later, Jennifer would say that moment on Family Feud was the turning point. Not because it took away the grief. Grief doesn't work that way. But because it reminded her that she didn't have to carry it alone. That vulnerability isn't weakness. That breaking down doesn't mean you're broken. And Steve Harvey? He learned something that day too. That sometimes the most important thing a person can do isn't make people laugh. It's making them feel seen. Making them feel held. Making them understand that in their darkest moments, humanity shows up. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Because this is what we're capable of when we stop performing and start being human.